Hi guys. So shall we start, Pratikesh? Hi guys. So welcome to today's class. We're going to discuss certain important things that happened in the month of February. So February, as I told you in the previous classes, also has been a little heavy in terms of current affairs. Okay. So before we move on to like very specific topics like pertaining to your international relations, economics, etc., there is this one very interesting topic that I want to talk to you about. I had generally kept it towards the end of the slide set, but I think we'll start with this. So if you look at your CLAT syllabus, there is a very interesting heading given there, art and culture, right? So, and I've been trying to find a lot of current affairs pertaining to art and culture, but not a lot of questions, not a lot of topics have been, as in I haven't found a lot of topics that I could say would probably come in your exam. However, there is this Sitagadi Hills Monastery that has been recently uncovered in Hazaribagh district of Jharkhand. Now, it's a 900 years old ancient Buddhist monastery that has been discovered. So, in itself, this monastery, like there are only a couple of things. But if you look at the CLAT paper and wherein it says that you'll have questions on art and culture, and generally it is expected that you'll have knowledge till class 12. I would give you a pro tip that you read anything and everything that there is about Buddhism and about Buddhist architecture in your class 11th and 12th art and culture book. So you'll NCRTs are readily available online. So I guess you obviously note down whatever things I'm going to tell you in this slide set, but you should also look at your class 11 and 12th ka art and culture NCRTs and try to see whatever is mentioned about Buddhism and whatever is mentioned about monasteries, etc. Because I think this can be a probable question, because otherwise not a lot is happening in the field of art and culture that can form a part of your question, right? So before we move on to the other topics, let's just discuss this brief topic. So isme there's not a lot to be discussed here. I just said that it's just that I wanted to start this class with this, and I wanted to point you towards your 11th and 12th NCRT, especially Buddhism and architecture and Buddhist architecture. Okay. So this building, if you look at it, it's a 10th century structure which resembles a small Buddha Vihar. So Buddha Vihar, once you read your 11th and 12th art and culture NCRTs, is a Buddhist shrine come monastery. Okay. Now, in this shrine, there were 5 things that were unearthed. So one of them, so there were 4 statues of one of the deities in Buddhism known as deity Tara in Varad Mudra. Okay, so in Buddhism, there's a lot of emphasis paid on hand gestures. So if you have a lot of Buddhist paintings, Buddhist sculptures, etc., so the hand gestures are also very important. So this would also be given in your respective NCRTs, the specific hand gestures. So 4 statues of deity Tara in this mudra known as Varad Mudra. Then you have 6 statue of Buddha in Bhumis Parsa Mudra. This is another hand gesture. Then another very important thing is that if you look at the deity Tara, then it points out towards Tantric Buddhism as it began to be practiced later, and this is a part of the Vajrayana sect of Buddhism, right? So there are 3 sects of Buddhism: Hinayan, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. So you should also be aware of what are the 3 sects of Buddhism. Now, this is obviously also given in your art and culture, and generally you should know about Buddhism. So please note there are 3 sects: Hinayan, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Now, this can be a very easy question in your CLAT exam. So now then Nagari script, which is basically a predecessor of the Devanagari script that we use today, has been used on one of the statues of Tara. And another thing that has been discovered is that there's another sculpture which is similar to the Shaivite deity Maheshwari that we worship today. And this sort of indicates that there was cultural assimilation in this area. In that, there were a lot of Shaivite Hindu worshippers and a lot of Buddhists, right? So basically, cultures are mixing together, and therefore you have artifacts that are being discovered which belong to multiple cultures, and most likely the cultures would have peacefully coexisted together at that point in time. So this is a very small piece of news. I will share this slide with Rathikesh. He'll probably forward it to you. But I suggest please read up about Buddhism and read up about Buddhist architecture, etc., from your class 11th and 12th or 8th or 9th NCRTs. You don't really need to go to Wikipedia or probably like do a thesis on Buddhism. Whatever is mentioned in NCRTs, that should be sufficient. I don't think questions will be asked out beyond that. Okay. Now that we've gotten this out, let's continue with our lecture. Okay. So I hope you guys know who Nirav Modi is, and I don't have to explain why Nirav Modi is a wanted man in India, right? So recently, so Nirav Modi, as you all know, has fled to the UK. Recently, courts in UK said that okay, we'll allow Nirav Modi to be extradited to India, and a lot of news articles were written in the month of February about this concept of extradition. So let's discuss what extradition is. Okay. Now, as you're going to become lawyers, I'm going to just throw a proper Supreme Court definition of extradition at your face. Like, obviously, you don't need to remember this. It's an objective type of an exam. So, Supreme Court says that extradition is the delivery. So, I'm not going to read this. Okay, this is slightly complicated. Basically, extradition is when I make a request to some country that there is some person who is a wanted criminal in my country, and I am unable to catch this person because this person has sought refuge in your country, and obviously the jurisdiction of my police does not extend into your country. So I would request that particular country to use their sovereign power, to use their police forces to make that arrest, and then send that person to me so that he can be tried under Indian law, and that person can be punished for the crime that he committed here. So it applies vice versa to both countries. So if I can make that sort of a request on an extradition, the another country can also make this sort of a request. Okay. Now, extradition requests can be made at any stage of a trial, even while there is an investigation going on, when the trial hasn't happened, or if there's someone who's under trial, in the sense that other trial is happening and that person probably is either under judicial custody or he might not even be in custody, he's just escaped. I mean, he would have escaped, that's why he's not under custody. Anyways, or it could be in the cases of convicted criminal, that some person has been convicted of a crime, he was put in jail, he probably escaped from jail and then migrated to some other country. Right? So extradition request can be made at any stage of the trial. It's not that only convicted criminals need to be extradited, right? Because of Nirav Modi, the trial is under, the investigation is going on, and the ED and the CBI need Nirav Modi and they want to question him for investigation, right? So extradition request can be made at any stage. Now, in India, there is an act known as the Indian Extradition Act of 1962. Everything pertaining to extradition is broadly governed by the Extradition Act. And if there is a bilateral extradition treaty between India and some other country, then the provisions of that treaty are read in accordance with Indian Extradition Act of 1962. Okay. Now, this act obviously applies for extraditing people from India to other countries and from extraditing people from those countries to India. Okay. Now, as I talked to you about India having treaties with other countries, India has extradition treaties with 39 countries currently. Okay. Now, the Ministry of External Affairs, and in that, the Consular Passport and Visa Division, this is not important. Basically, you should know that Ministry of Affairs, one department within the Ministry of Affairs, is the nodal authority for extradition. Okay. Now, the request for extradition can only be made by the Ministry of External Affairs. It cannot be made at the request of the members of the public. Right? So you have to approach the courts or the or any body. If you want somebody to extradite, basically courts and investigative agencies, they have to approach the government. By that I mean they have to approach the Ministry of External Affairs. And if the Consular Passport and Visa Division of the Ministry of External Affairs deems it fit to raise an extradition request, then the Ministry of External Affairs itself only can raise that extradition request. No other member of the public or any other arm of the government can do it. Okay. So now let's look at what extradition treaties are. So the 1962 Act defines what a treaty is. Basically, any treaty, agreement, or arrangement which relates to extradition of any criminals, etc., and is binding on India is treated to be an extradition treaty under the 1962 Extradition Act. Okay. Now, every treaty obviously has certain different principles depending on the cultural sensitivities of the countries, depending on the closeness of relationship between India and that particular country. But there are five principles that are broadly common to all these sort of treaties. Okay. So the first one is that extradition only applies to offenses that are stipulated in each such treaty, right? So let's say I have signed a treaty with France, for example, hypothetically in 1955. Now something which is classified as an offense in that treaty, let's say murder or anything, only that offense can be, I mean, India can only make a request for extradition to France for an offense that is mentioned in that treaty. So let's say something new happened in 90s, 80s, technology developed, etc. And there were different kinds of offenses that were created. Now, if I haven't updated or amended my extradition treaty with France, and that particular offense that I'm charging this person in India with has not been entered into and has not been mentioned in the amended or the updated treaty, then I can't make an extradition request with France. Okay. So the offense has to be clearly stated in that treaty. Outside of the offenses stated in that particular bilateral treaty, you cannot make an extradition request. I mean, you can, but the country won't comply with it. Okay. Now there is also a provision that it should be a dual offense. In that offense that I want to try that person for in India, and I believe that that person has absconded to another country, should also be an offense in that country. So if it's not an offense in France, for example, then France will not extradite that person. For example, hypothetically, before the Naz Foundation judgment, homosexuality was a crime in India, right? Now, let's say a state in India wanted to persecute someone for practicing homosexuality, but that person had migrated to France. Now, under French law, homosexuality is not a crime, right? So I could, as an Indian, so the MEA basically could not ask France to extradite that person because this might have been an offense in India back then, but this wasn't an offense in France. So there has to be duality of offense. The offense should, I mean, the act that is under consideration should be an offense in both the countries. Okay. Now, the third thing is obviously the extraditing country has to be satisfied that there is a prima facie case, which means case which is being made upfront. There is some sort of a case against the offender or the accused, and it's not a frivolous accusation. It's not a politically motivated, let's say, request or of any kind. The fourth thing is that let's say I make a request to France that so and so is wanted for murder, then I can only persecute that person for murder. So let's say France sends that person back to me, then I can only prosecute that person for that particular offense. Once that person comes into India, then I can tell France that, oh, maybe this person is not guilty of murder, but this person also committed theft, which I forgot to mention to you, right? So you have to make sure that this person can only be punished for the offense that is very clearly mentioned in the extradition request. Okay. Then obviously the final thing is that obviously that person must be accorded a fair trial. Now, let's look at the position of India and the position of extradition in India vis-a-vis other countries. Okay. So if you look at the 1962 Act, there are more than 32 countries, 39 countries, obviously, in the world, right? So we have had extradition treaties with these 39 countries. So it makes it much easier for us to place extradition request. But the 1962 Act allows us to request the process of extradition from any other country in the world, irrespective of the fact that we've entered into an extradition treaty or not. Okay. Now, let's say there is an urgency right now, and maybe we haven't proved any criminal wrongdoing, etc. But the government believes that there is an urgency. So India can request the government of that country to make a provisional arrest before we make the extradition request, right? Because as I told you, right, the grounds for extradition, the offenses for extradition have to be very clear. So you have to be very specific vis-a-vis the grounds that you're going to mention in your extradition request. So you might need some time to fix concrete grounds, right? But in the meantime, you can send a request to the partner country and ask them to provisionally arrest the fugitive while the extradition request is being prepared officially by the MEA. Okay. Now, very interesting thing is that if Indian nationals who return to India after committing offenses in West Asia or Gulf countries, then these offenders, I mean, these people are not sent back to the Gulf countries. These are not extradited. They are punished in India in accordance with Indian law. So this is clearly mentioned in the bilateral treaties, except Oman. Okay. So except Oman, we don't agree with sending our own nationals to be punished in accordance with the laws of those countries. So if these people are there, they commit a crime and then they get caught. Obviously, they're going to be punished by the law of the land, right? But let's say they committed a crime, then they came back to India. Now, if any other country in the Middle East makes a request that you need to send this person back, then in those particular scenarios, we as Indians do not send our Indian nationals to those countries. We punish them in India with and proceed against them under the Indian law. Okay. Now, obviously, we were trying to get Vijay Mallya, we're trying to get Nirav Modi under the extradition law, but we are not succeeding as yet. But it's not that India hasn't succeeded. One very famous example is the extradition request of the famous underworld don Abu Salim. Okay, he was extradited from Portugal to India to face charges, and then he was subsequently convicted. The only condition that Portugal put in the extradition request is that he won't be given capital punishment, in the sense that he won't be put to death, because as per the European law, extradition to a country is prohibited if there is capital punishment in that country. So there are few countries in the world, including India, US, etc., which still have the provision of death penalty. So there are a lot of countries in Europe which have eliminated death penalty. People are not killed over there, right, for any sort of a crime that they may commit. So there is a general consensus in Europe, and then apart from the consensus, there is general law which says that if you are faced with an extradition request, and if you're a European country, then you will not extradite the particular person to any other country which has the provision for capital punishment. Okay. So sanctity of life is way more important for these European nations. Now, there are certain bars to extradition, in the sense that there are certain conditions. If they are not met, then extradition won't happen. First is if there is an absence of a treaty. So generally, if there is a treaty, then the states are obviously obligated to extradite the nationals, right? Because they've agreed to in written in an agreement. So if there is no treaty, then there is no obligation on the state. So they might accept your request or they might not accept your request. So another thing is, for a non-treaty crime, let's say a crime, as I mentioned earlier, has not been mentioned in the treaty, then obviously, irrespective of the fact that however grave that crime might be in your particular country, if that crime is A, not mentioned in the treaty, B, if that crime is not a crime in that reciprocating country, then obviously extradition request won't be met. Now, military and political offenses, if someone has uh, basically, if there is someone is being charged under a military code, or if somebody is being charged again as a matter of political vendetta, then that particular country can refuse extradition. So terrorism and violent crimes obviously are excluded from definitions of political offenses. If somebody is a terrorist or if somebody has committed a violent crime, then obviously, irrespective of the fact that that person might also be suffering from some form of political vendetta, if a crime of terrorism or any violent crime has been committed, then obviously he or she has to be extradited. Otherwise, if there is a general military offense or a political offense, then mostly countries do not extradite such individuals. Okay. Now, you'll have to bear with me. I'm not really feeling that well today. Cool. So the next topic that I want to discuss with you is NASA's Mars mission, right? So recently, NASA's Perseverance rover touched down on Mars. This is in February, and in April, a helicopter, which was part of that mission, known as the Ingenuity Helicopter, also took off. So I agree, this is generally we are studying Feb current affairs, but I'm also clubbing one event that happened in March, because I don't want to separate, sorry, which happened in April, because I don't want to separate these two topics and then teach them again. So I'll just club it here. Okay. So first, let's try to understand why this excitement about Mars. Why does Elon Musk want to go to Mars? Why does Elon Musk want humanity to be a multiplanetary species? Why is India sending a Mars orbiter mission, and why are other countries trying to explore Mars? So there are particular scientific reasons for that. The first one is that scientists have studied and they've basically estimated that about 4 billion years ago, the environment on Venus, Earth, and Mars was almost similar, and the environment was habitable. Mars at that point of time had a very thick atmosphere, which meant that there would be water available on, as in not today, but millions of years ago, there would be water available in a stable form. So if there is a thick atmosphere, which means that the temperature is regulated, which means that there is stable form of water, then it is very likely that, I mean, it's not likely, but it's possible that some form of a microscopic, very basic life would have evolved on Mars. Okay. Now, Mars also has topographical features very similar to Earth, like they have volcanoes, canyons, impact basins, etc. And logistically speaking as well, Mars is the only planet that humans can practically visit or inhabit in the long term, right? Like it's the closest. So that's logistically also it's the easiest one to explore. Okay. Now, if you look at all the temperature variations that you see all around our solar system, Mars is the only planet which has a relatively compatible and non-hostile temperature, right? So obviously Mars is also fairly close in the sense that, so at the equator, the temperatures are a great 20 degrees Celsius, but they go to minus 125 degrees Celsius at the poles, right? However, around the equator in Mars, we could probably hypothetically build life someday, at least the temperature conditions are adequate. Now, let's look at what this Perseverance mission was. Okay, so Mars 2020 Perseverance rover mission is a general part of NASA's Mars exploration program. So this is one of the missions under the program. NASA has had a multi-year uh, exploration program for Mars. Basically, they are sending robots to explore the red planet. So this Perseverance mission was launched in July 2020, and the primary purpose of the Perseverance mission is, as I told you, is to detect signs of early life on Mars and to collect samples and soil, etc., so that possibly they can be brought back to the Earth. Okay. So Perseverance rover landed in this place called the Jezero crater, and it will begin its 2-year-long investigation over here. Okay, so scientists have estimated that about 3.5 billion years ago, it's possible that this crater had water. So if any life had started evolving in Mars, then probably remnants of that life form or some form of an evidence could be collected in this region in Mars, at on Mars, known as the Jezero crater. Okay. Now, one very interesting thing about the Perseverance mission is that it will carry a unique instrument known as MOXIE, or Mars Oxygen ISRU experiment. ISRU means in situ resource utilization. In situ means at that particular place. Okay. So which basically means that this will use local resources to meet any human needs or requirements in the future. The most important thing that humans need is oxygen, right? So the atmosphere of Mars is rich in carbon dioxide. So the idea is that MOXIE will basically break down that carbon dioxide and manufacture oxygen on Mars. Otherwise, if astronauts go somewhere, they have to carry a lot of oxygen with themselves. Now, carrying so much oxygen is also hard, right? Because where else will the fuel go? And it generally it's a logistical nightmare. So now what NASA is trying to do, they are trying to basically send hardware to Mars, which will continue to manufacture molecular oxygen at Mars for human beings to survive. Okay. Now this Perseverance mission is also ferrying a helicopter, which as I told you, which is named as Ingenuity. And this has now become the first aircraft to have a powered and controlled flight on any other planet in the solar system. Okay. Now, the Ingenuity helicopter itself is a very interesting piece of equipment. It has large rotor blades that are able to spin at about 2,400 RPM. Now, please note this figure of 2,400 RPM, and I will show you the significance of this number in the next slide set. Okay. Now, another interesting thing is that the Ingenuity helicopter is solar powered, therefore it does not need any external fuel, and over a period of time, it can recharge itself and basically function on its own. Now, this helicopter doesn't really have a mission. I mean, it's an experimental mission because NASA also believed that there is no guarantee that this helicopter will fly or not. So they could not rely on the Ingenuity helicopter to do very specific things for the Perseverance mission, right? So it's an add-on. Chala to chala, nahi chala to no problem. So now that since it has started working, it will help the Ingenuity. It will help the Perseverance rover to collect samples from hard to reach places, etc. Now, in April, Ingenuity took a 40-second flight on Mars and ascended 3 meters, roughly 9-10 feet into the air. Now, this is a big number. I'll tell you why. Let's look at the engineering challenges that you face on the surface of Mars. Okay. So, as I told you, the atmosphere is very, very thin. So, the atmospheric density on Mars is about 1% or 1/100th of the atmospheric density on Earth. So therefore, to sustain flight, any helicopter blade has to start rotating at 2400 rpm, which is about 300, which is about 800 times faster as a passenger helicopter to fly on Earth. So any helicopter on Earth needs to have a sufficient engine which can generate about 300 to 350 rpm. If that sort of rotor force is being generated on Earth, then you can have proper sustained helicopter flight. At Mars, on Mars, you have to, the engine output and the engine power has to effectively be 8 times more than that. Okay. Now, similarly, because of the fact that the atmosphere is not very dense, for a helicopter to fly about a few meters, like 2-3 meters on Mars, basically is equivalent to the helicopter flying over Mount Everest on Earth. Okay. Now, to provide things into context, helicopters don't have that high ceiling of a flight rate. Like a commercial Boeing 747 flies at the height of Mount Everest, and that's a aircraft. It's not a helicopter. So helicopters on Earth cannot. I mean, they can if you engineer them very well, but at a commercial level, helicopters on Earth do not fly at that level, right? So this was a very difficult engineering feat. Now, apart from the fact that it had to recharge itself, apart from the fact that it had to generate 2400 rpm of rotor force, it also had to survive the extremely cold nights that you can find on land on Mars. And these extreme cold nights had a brutal effect on batteries and onboard computers. But somehow the Ingenuity helicopter survived. Now, a very interesting thing is that the chief engineer for the Ingenuity project in the Perseverance mission is an Indian origin person known as Mr. J. Balram, who's a graduate of IIT Madras, and he later chose to work at NASA. Okay. Now, I hope this thing is a little clear to you. Now, the next thing I want to discuss with you is the National Hydrogen Mission. Okay. So the National Hydrogen Energy Mission was announced in this budget. Okay. Now let's look at what it is. So the primary emphasis that was very clear from the finance minister's speech is that India wants to generate hydrogen from green power sources. And this particular hydrogen, which is generated from green power sources, is known as white hydrogen. Sorry, is known as green hydrogen. Okay. And India wants to not only generate it scientifically, but it wants to do it at a commercial level and enable its commercial use profitably. Okay. So if you look at the broad guidelines of the mission, I'm not going to focus very specifically on them because this is an objective type paper, not a subjective type paper for you. So they basically want to create large volumes of hydrogen and they want to create an adequate infrastructure for doing that. Then they also want to demonstrate it in niche applications like your transport industry, all of that. Then they want the research and development to be very goal oriented and not generally academic. They want it to be scientific and industrial. Then they also want to have a proper policy support around the National Hydrogen Mission so that at least the scientists have a free hand and nothing is lagging from the government. Okay. Now they also want to put regulatory standards and regulations for hydrogen technologies, right? Because any technology that might evolve out of this has to have certain regulations, laws, ethics governing it. Now, before we proceed further, there's this term that I discussed with you called green hydrogen. Let's look at the type of hydrogen and how it is classified. So blue hydrogen is basically made from methane and carbon dioxide is captured and stored. This is called blue hydrogen. This has a low carbon footprint. Then the next category is green hydrogen, which is basically made from renewable energy and no carbon dioxide is emitted. So this is a zero carbon form of hydrogen. This is known as green hydrogen. Then you have brown and gray hydrogen, which is basically high carbon dioxide emitting process of generating hydrogen. Okay. Now, the thing that the National Hydrogen Mission tends to focus on, and this is something that you should also know, is that why should we use green hydrogen? So the first thing is that it's the cleanest source of energy that is available and it is highly efficient. So hydrogen is about 2 to 3 times as efficient as burning petrol. Okay. So therefore, you can decarbonize a lot of sectors where fuel is directly burned, like iron, steel, chemical, transportation, etc. Now, hydrogen also has the potential to transform transportation sector. Okay. Now, if you are generally aware, transportation sector is a big problem for any of you living in North India. A lot of our cities are polluted, and basically the cars that are being driven on the road and trucks, etc., are a major contributor to both the greenhouse gas emissions and the pollution that we see in our cities, right? So hydrogen can be used in two ways. A, it can directly be used as for the internal combustion engines, although that's going to be very expensive, but it can also be used as a fuel cell. Okay, so hydrogen is now being seen as a direct replacement for fuel cells. Okay, and if you are able to scientifically and commercially and manufacture a commercially viable hydrogen car, then that car will have an almost zero carbon footprint, right? Which is amazing. Now, another very interesting thing is that apart from the fact that we want to move away from fossil fuels, there is a general push towards renewable energy. Now, one of the main problems of renewable energy is that there are periods where there is a lot of renewable energy. For example, let's say you're talking about solar energy. During the day, a lot of solar energy generated, not a problem. But it might not be available when people need it. So there's a lot of issue with transporting and sorry with storing renewable energy and ensuring a continuous supply, right? So let's say you have diesel, it's very easy to store diesel and you can use diesel whenever and wherever you want. So there's a sort of guarantee that comes with fossil fuels, right? So that sort of a guarantee is missing when it comes to renewable sources of energy. Now hydrogen can fill this gap. So hydrogen can act as an energy storage option, right? So you can basically generate a lot. You can use the renewable energy that is being generated in a solar power plant or a hydroelectricity power plant, and then you can use this energy to create green hydrogen. Then you can use this green hydrogen as a store of energy, and you can use it at a later date when renewable energy sources might not be readily available, right? So it can act like a buffer or it can act like a storage of energy, which basically deals with one of the very important problems of renewable energy, that is reliability. Okay. Now, if you look at how India functions today, India imports a large, about 85% of its oil and about half of its gas demand. So this also has a large bearing on the current account deficit that we have. Now, as of financial year 2020, we spent $104 billion in crude oil imports. Now, if we have sufficient technologies that are developed in India, hydrogen is abundantly available, and therefore we can reduce a lot of our crude oil imports. That will be great for our economy. Now, another thing that I want to discuss with you is hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. Okay. Now, these are, so if you know of Elon Musk, he's trying to make Tesla, and a lot of other companies in the world are generally trying to come up with electric vehicles, right? So hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles are better in comparison to general battery electric vehicles. For example, the refueling time is going to be very low, right? So let's say there is a hydrogen fuel cell. A hydrogen fuel cell can probably be the size of your laptop. So instead of spending half an hour, 45 minutes, 1 hour at the charging station, you can basically go to a charging station, you can replace the hydrogen fuel cell, and you can get going. So the refueling time comes very close to the regular refueling time for a diesel vehicle, right? So that's one of the major disincentives for people to go for an electric vehicle, that they don't want to be stuck at a charging station for 1 hour and then wait for their car to be charged. So this problem can be solved by your hydrogen fuel cell electricity vehicles. Now, per unit volume, hydrogen basically stores 5 times more energy than a regular battery. So a lot of boot space is freed up. Your cars become smaller, your cars become lighter, they become more efficient, energy efficient, and passengers get more storage space and they go further, right? So it's like a win-win in every way. Now, another very important thing is that there are certain rare earth metals like your lithium, etc., which are required for batteries, which are required in the batteries for battery electric vehicles, right? So India doesn't have rare earth minerals like lithium, so it will have to depend on countries like China, for example, and that's something that we don't want to do. So if we are able to transition to hydrogen fuel cell electricity vehicles, then we probably don't need like your, then we solve a lot of issues of regular battery electric vehicles, and then you also deal, I mean, solve the issue of the excessive demand for rare earth minerals. Now, there are a lot of huge sectors that cannot be electrified, like your heavy haul air travel, heavy haul trucks, etc., because it's just not viable because they have to travel long distances and battery technology is just not evolved enough. So those sectors, you can have your hydrogen fuel cells, etc. Moreover, if you use electric vehicles for everything, then in a country like India, there's a huge problem, right? Because 70% of our energy comes from thermal power plants. So फर्क ही नहीं पड़ता अगर आपकी गाड़ी बिजली से चल रही है, because that बिजली or that electricity is going to be produced by burning coal in some thermal power plant, right? So at the end of the day, you're basically going to be consuming fossil fuel, non-renewable energy in the form of coal, and you're going to be polluting the environment. And coal is dirtier than petrol, so it's you're sort of better off using diesel and petrol as opposed to using coal, and then using that electricity generated from that coal to run your heavy planes, trains, and other vehicles. Okay. Then there is a dual investment opportunity. So right now, India has a huge problem of waste management. We need money to be thrown into waste management so that we can deal with the problem of the excessive solid waste that India has. At the same time, we also need money to be thrown into research for hydrogen, right? So you can club both of these together, and you can look at exploring technologies which convert biological waste and plastic waste into hydrogen. So basically you're going to kill two birds with one stone. आप अपने कचरे से hydrogen generate करोगे, और फिर hydrogen से you will power your electricity, which means that in the end there's going to be less trash generally. Okay. Now, obviously, there are major challenges. First one is the process of generating green hydrogen is very energy extensive. So you have to use a renewable source of energy to produce certain electricity, and then you have to use that electricity to generate, to break up a water molecule, for example, and then extract hydrogen out of it. So as I told you, in India, 70% of electricity is anyway generated from thermal power plants, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. Then secondly, hydrogen fuel cells are not going to be cheap. It's going to be very expensive. And साथ ही साथ, it's going to be very expensive to maintain those hydrogen fuel cells. Okay. Then you require high R&D requirements. You need a lot of money. And another problem is with regards to this is in transporting and storing hydrogen. Okay. So hydrogen in its gaseous form, as it will be stored, is going to be highly inflammable. So you will have to convert it to liquid. So to convert hydrogen to liquid, you have to reduce the temperature to minus 253 degrees Celsius. So that is going to be hard. And hydrogen is an odorless gas. So if there is a leakage of hydrogen gas, which is highly inflammable, then you wouldn't probably know. Right. So these are certain challenges that you're going to face with hydrogen. It's not that it cannot happen, but it's going to be very hard. But the government of India has been, let's say, wise enough that it sees commercial hydrogen as a viable option, and it is going to give it commercial hydrogen and the national hydrogen mission budgetary and non-budgetary support. Okay. So I wanted to club India and Mauritius, India and Maldives. So basically, two little things happened vis-a-vis Mauritius and Maldives. So you'll probably not have an individual article on either of those. You will generally have an article on India's presence in the Indian Ocean region. So you should know where these countries are and what sort of engagement we have with these countries. Okay, so India and Mauritius have signed an economic partnership, and at the same time, India has signed a defense agreement with Maldives to boost its maritime capability. So this is the map of Asia. This is Maldives, and this is Mauritius. Okay, so India, as you can see from this map, these two island countries are very important for India because a lot of trade that comes to India passes through these countries, and generally these two countries are at the important junctions of global sea lines of communication. Okay. Now, let's look at the CECPA that India has signed with Mauritius. Okay, so this is the first trade agreement that India has signed with a country in Africa. So that itself is it has a big significance. Then this agreement is a very limited agreement, so it covers your technical barriers to trade in goods sectors, etc. It's not a very comprehensive trade agreement as of now. It's going to be updated later on. Okay. Now, at the same time, while signing the CECPA, India has also extended a $100 million line of credit to Mauritius to buy Indian defense equipment for its armed forces. Okay. Now, similarly, India has extended a $50 million line of credit for defense projects between the Finance Ministry of Maldives and Export-Import Bank of India, right? So basically, we've extended another line of credit to Maldives for defense procurement. Okay. So as per this agreement, India will develop and maintain an important naval facility for the armed forces of Maldives, known in this island called Sifwaru. Okay. Now, India has also, if you look at India and Maldives relationship, we've signed a project for execution for construction of roads in this island called Adu, which is the first of 8 major infrastructure projects which are being signed and worked on between India and Maldives. Now, these two countries are really important because in the larger geopolitical game, every country has certain trade interest in the Indo-Pacific region, right? And the United States, for example, has also seen a general tilt towards the Indo-Pacific. So India, China, Pakistan, Iran, name any country that you have. Everyone has common interest in this particular region because a lot of global trade passes through these regions. So it's very important for India to sort of maintain very good relations with these countries so that it can ensure that a lot of oil, etc., that India receives, a lot of trade that India has with Africa and other countries in the world is generally not hampered by, let's say, piracy or by any other sovereign or non-sovereign state or non-state actors. Okay. So guys, this is pretty much it in today's class. Sitagrahi Monastery is something that I have discussed with you already. Ideally, you should read your art and culture 11th and 12th. Sorry for finishing this video early. Like I'm not feeling very well and I'm having certain difficulties talking. So I hope you basically understood what we had to discuss today. If there's any doubt, you can send it on the chat. I'm here for a bit. Otherwise, you're done for today. Cool. I think we are done then. Great.